As long as the roots are not severed, all is well, and all will be well in the garden. Hello, huge movie fanatic Nate, stopping on by once again, coming at you for one of my famed movie/Blu-ray reviews. Today I'm going to be reviewing the movie and Blu-ray of Being There, Hal Ashby film from 1979, and then I'll be reviewing, after I review the movie, I'll be reviewing the Criterion Blu-ray that I recently picked up for $20. I figured since I could get it for $20 it was time to pick this mother up. I've been eyeing this for quite a while, and I figured now's the time to do it with the sale and all. So I'll talk about the movie and then I'll review the Criterion Blu-ray. So my history with Being There goes back to basically my childhood, my mom being a fan of Peter Sellers and the Pink Panther movies and stuff like that. I imagine, like we did so often in the 80s when we first got a VCR and stuff, her idea was to not rent, movies from a video store, but instead to tape movies off TV. We ended up doing both. I did a lot of taping movies off TV to own them, if you will, but she ended up giving in, and we did end up renting, videotapes from the video store as well. But I'm pretty sure the first time I saw Being There was, the movie played on TV, and we probably recorded it off TV and stuff like that. I have no idea. Well, I mean, I got a ballpark of when I first saw this. I want to say I was probably around maybe 10 or 11 years old when I saw Being There for the very first time. And even being a young kid, I was really interested in more, I guess, mature kind of movies. I mean, I first saw 2001: A Space Odyssey when I was possibly, 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that, and I didn't really like, I just liked pretty much the middle of it. I didn't really watch the ape stuff or the end, beyond or Into the Unknown or whatever the hell it is. The goofy, psychedelic ending. But when I was a kid, I'd watch the middle part, the space stuff and everything that took place until, everyone was dead and he leaves the Discovery ship to go into the unknown or whatever. But, and the interesting thing about 2001 and Being There is they have some, I was watching both of these movies taped off TV, around the same time, when I was either 10, 11, 12 years old or whatever, and they both have a couple of things in common. Like, they have that really, really cool, just like, mature, just slow pace to them, and they also have both have really great, just naturalistic cinematography. And the third thing that they share, or the third big thing that they share, is the use of, the also, thus, Zarathustra, or however the hell you pronounce that piece of music that was featured in 2001. The opening, of course, the dun, 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 and, that theme, or that piece of music, is also, of course, featured in this movie, Being There. And the way they used it is just so amazing, where they kind of, jazzed it up, or jived it, jive version or something like that, for the the late 70s contemporary version of the piece of music, if you will, was absolutely fantastic. So I can just remember, because of that piece of music being there as well, and just the overall tone. I mean, as a kid, even if you just watched both movies and not knowing who directed them, they very well could have been directed by the same person. Being There in 2001: A Space Odyssey, to me, I guess ever since I was a kid, they just, I don't know, they're kind of, even though they're not made by the same people or anything like that, for me they have the same overall feeling and stuff to them. But anyway, on to the review of the movie. Basically, the whole premise of this movie is about, Peter Sellers plays this character by the name of Chance, who basically, we don't know any backstory. No one, including all the characters in this movie and the audience or the viewer of the movie, are able to get any backstory on this character. It must have been, we can only assume this Chance character was, we don't know. We don't know. This Chance character is basically, as we meet him in the movie, is this guy who's, I don't know, maybe I don't know how old he is in the movie, if he's in his 50s or something when this movie was made, but he's basically the simple-minded character who has basically over the years become, a gardener in this wealthy guy's apartment, or whatever you call this place that he's living in the movie, home, we'll just say home. This, probably wealthy person from the, 30s, 40s, 50s, and, 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and 60s and stuff. This guy, this Chance, Peter Sellers' character, has basically spent his whole life living with this person, and basically maybe a gardener, or not maybe a gardener, but he's been the gardener. But one can only wonder, if, I don't know, it's kind of a mystery. And to be honest, it's cool, with everything being explained in so many movies. It's kind of cool just not knowing who this kid is. Is this kid, is this Chance an illegitimate offspring? But then there'd be some record of it and stuff like that. So we basically don't know, where this character came from. But basically, when we meet him at the beginning of the movie, he's just doing his normal thing. He's a really, really simpleton, kind of like, Forrest Gump would probably go on to kind of rip this movie off more or less, or the story of Chance, or AKA Chauncey Gardner. So it's kind of pre-Forrest Gump, kind of Forrest Gump thing, if you will, where basically Peter Sellers' character is just this character who's basically never left this house or this apartment, whatever the hell you call this thing, where he was just been fed by the maid, and just had everything, room and board and all his needs taken care of by this wealthy older gentleman that was employing the maid and him as a gardener or whatever. Chances are he didn't get any money, but he was just housed and taken care of or whatever. But like I say, as a viewer, it's kind of interesting to try to hypothesize as, what is his backstory. But again, I like the fact that we don't know. So the story of this movie is the simpleton. Basically, when the movie starts, he wakes up with this, he's got this TV that I guess comes on in the morning with a timer. And another thing I appreciated as a young child about this movie, being a fan of 2001: A Space Odyssey and the classical music used in the movie, that's the case, with this movie as well. Like right in the beginning of the movie, this TV automatically comes on, and Chance is being awakened by this, this classical music piece being played live, or maybe it's not live, but regardless, being played on the TV and stuff like that. So, as a kid, and that's another thing about this movie that that makes it kind of a companion or a brother, or in the same general family to me as a child as 2001: A Space Odyssey is. It was a movie that incorporated classical music, or at least to a certain degree, in the movie. So I appreciated that as a kid, already being a fan of classical music through movies like Amadeus and 2001: A Space Odyssey and stuff. But when we meet this character, it's quickly kind of evident as more and more time goes on that he's in all intents purposes, or by whatever contemporary scientific definition, an idiot or whatever, just this kind of galumphing idiot or whatever. But not to say that the great thing about him is he's been a gardener his whole life, and obviously he just probably learned to do it by just doing it. And what's so great about it is one might be able to call him an idiot or whatever, but I think unfortunately I would have actually liked to see maybe a little bit more of insight into his actually gardening, if you will, because for the movie's length being just over 2 hours long, and him being such a big plot point of him being a gardener and stuff, we kind of don't really even see enough of him gardening, or enough of his insight into gardening really to satisfy this particular viewer personally. But what I was getting at is, although this guy may come across as like some doofus idiot or moron in social situations or whatever, it's very evident that in the little bit of gardening we see of him doing, or talking about gardening that he does in the movie, that he's very proficient, having done it for such a long time, and pretty much one of the only things he did do. He's very proficient at gardening, which is an interesting plot point that really goes under the surface or whatever. So it's basically saying that just because someone isn't good at social situations, or thinking about this or that, or doing this or that, doesn't mean they're absolutely worthless. Chances are the Chance might be a better gardener than a lot of people who go to gardening school, or whatever. What I'm saying is, this guy's not a total loss, and he is really proficient at this one thing, being gardening, and it's kind of really could be, if you really wanted to dive deeper into it, it could be some kind of metaphor for him just being a, you know, a life sustainer, life giver, you know, a father figure in that sense of being just, even though he is overall comes across as a galoomph or whatever, he does have a profound nurturing ability. You know, his existence does have, you know, a big meaning and purpose, and is definitely useful. So very early on in the movie, when he wakes up, we basically see that he's just like this channel. There's some other movies that have come out since where you've got just, I don't know, quote unquote mentally incompetent people who are just, you know, flipping through channels with, you know, gazing stares and just like, But this character is, you know, flipping through channels and seeing all this and that, and very quickly as a viewer when we're watching this movie, we can see very quickly that he's, everything he knows and all of the stuff, you know, that he knows in life or whatever, he's learning from the TV, you know, handshaking or certain, you know, thing of tipping the hat to women or tipping the hat to people, or, you know, everything that he knows, and presumably maybe even gardening to a certain extent. And all his mannerisms he learns from TV, and that's kind of interesting how maybe on another little low-level element they put into that movie that's very subtle is, I mean, isn't that true of all of us, to be honest? I mean, maybe not me so much because I don't watch TV, but the majority of people, I think, maybe that was a little subtle thing there that Hal Ashby put into the movie of being like, well, not only is Chance, you know, his behaviors and so many of his, you know, what he does or what he knows is influenced by the TV. I mean, that's how it is for the majority of the citizens of the world, unfortunately. You know, they learn how to think and what to believe and how to act based on TV as well. Maybe not consciously, but definitely subconsciously if they're watching enough of it and stuff. So that's another, if you really wanted to go deeper into the whole thing about Chance being just like a TV addict in this movie, that might be another thing that one could take away from the movie. But one thing that's interesting about the movie being, you know, like 40 years or 41 years old at this point, the movie that is it's kind of interesting at the beginning, towards the, I guess the first half of this movie, it's really kind of interesting because we see a lot of actual TV and commercials and this kind of stuff in that, and I think it probably wasn't very interesting, obviously, when this movie came out, because these commercials and all this kind of stuff that that are shown on the TV in the movie were, you know, just you know, seen every day, and nothing, you know, nothing really of any kind of interest to anyone who was watching the movie in the theater when it came out. But 40 years or 41 years later, now watching the movie, it's really interesting to see all these commercials and stuff that, you know, being the age I am, I mean, frick, I can remember hearing some of this stuff and, you know, echoing in the house when I was a kid, and some of these jingles and stuff for commercials and stuff, and in particularly that really just goofy ass cartoon of that basketball player, you know, dribbling and just all, it's just like, oh my god. And it was just, in any case, it's interesting 41 years later to see just the ads and all the stuff that's playing on the TV in the movie, because as I said, I mean, some of it is actually, I can even remember from, you know, stuff like it, if not some of the stuff itself being jingles and stuff being heard on the TV when I was a kid and stuff. So, oh my gosh. So I'm already taking way too long with this review. In an effort to try to streamline it a little bit, I will go on with the review saying that basically not long after the movie starts and we're introduced to Chance, the man idiot or the man boy idiot guy, gardener guy, we learn from the maid, I might as well just, I mean, it's a plot point, otherwise I wouldn't say it, but I might as well just say the black maid that has probably been with this guy, you know, employed her for a long time as well, comes in to, instead of, you know, give Chance his breakfast, comes in to basically inform him that the old man's dead. He's in there deader than hell. You know, and basically at this point is, so when we come into Chance's life, we come into a very, 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 you know, a turning point in his life, where what he's known his whole life of 50, whatever, however the hell old he is in this movie, 50 years plus or whatever, has been just normalcy, and now when the movie starts, everything's being disrupted. The source of his, basically normalcy is being disrupted, and basically he's going to be put out onto the street, and that's the scene and basically this character, this Chance character, has never went outside, has never left this house, this place that he's living, and he's never even gone outside of the house. And there was this really cool, because this guy was, this was an affluent neighborhood when the guy was, moved in there and stuff, and for the first part of Chance's life or whatever, that he's got this, even though this is located in the city, he's got this backyard, this bricked in backyard area where there was a garden for Chance to basically do his work out there, during the gardening months or whatever. So so I don't know if it's like 20 minutes into the movie where actually has to leave and go somewhere else because, the lawyers are coming in and kicking him out or whatever. He no longer has a legal right to live there. So the scene is actually, just like, oh my God, when he actually leaves the place, and that's where they use that, also that's Zarathustra. I don't know how the hell you say that piece of music, but a jive version or a jazz version or whatever the hell you want to call it, version of that piece of music is used here as he's, ventures out for the very first time out of doors and into this crappy world. And it's funny how we see, how the neighborhood has presumably deteriorated in the decades that he's lived there, since his employer or whatever, or his keeper, or his, the guy who took care of him, since he moved in, I mean, the neighborhood has completely gone to hell, and he's basically just, unbeknownst to him, living in this ghetto and stuff, and he comes across some black people, and it's just kind of funny scenes ensue with his, it's just this completely, what's great about this movie is he's just this completely naive character that's just put out into the world of shit, basically. And I identify a lot with this character because I was the same way as a kid. Like, I was just innocent, and I didn't have any siblings or anything like that, so, and I didn't do a lot of TV watching, and I didn't have a whole hell of a lot of friends and stuff, so I was kind of sheltered as a kid growing up too. And I guess I identify with this movie a lot because a lot of the trials and tribulations he goes through are very relatable. It's just like, because he is the absolute, I mean, he's like a 50-ish year old guy who's has the innocence of a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old, or a 1.5-year-old, which is just profound about this movie. One of the other things I don't want to forget to mention is that basically one of the things that's really cool about this movie is that the place he was living in, because he was living in probably a more or less wealthy guy's house and taking care of his garden and stuff like that, is the house that he was living in was really kind of classy, and as a result, the older guy that was taking care of him, as the older guy was just bedridden and stuff, that Chance would wear, he could have full reign of the guy who was taking care of him's wardrobe and stuff. So what's definitely worth mentioning about this movie is he's really well dressed, and what's so cool is it's almost like, because he's wearing older clothes, probably from the 30s and 40s and stuff in this movie, it's kind of a visual representation of how he's just so much different than the rest of the quote-unquote contemporary world in the movie, because he's not only mentally different, but he's like dressed really classy and stuff, and from a different era or whatever, and I really like that too. And there's so many things about this movie that I liked as a kid when I first saw it that I necessarily wasn't even conscious of, because I really wasn't, when I first saw this movie, I really wasn't aware of necessarily the 20s, 30s, 40s era yet necessarily, but even as a kid I was just like not really even being conscious of it. I was like, I liked his wardrobe, and I like the classiness of this movie. That's one thing about this movie, is it's just like, just really kind of high class movie, because even at the beginning where he was living his whole life was a kind of a high class place, and the rest of the movie he spends in high class surroundings as well. So it's kind of like a high class, fancy schmancy kind of a movie. But I think the reason, so basically he comes not long after, because when you're watching this movie and he's exiting the place and going out in the world, you're like, well, how the hell is this guy going to survive? And he, since a black woman, he spent his whole life having a black woman fix his meals. There's this funny scene where just a really throwaway quick bit where he's, sees a black woman with a grocery bag on the street and he's like, I'm very hungry, can you give me some lunch or food or whatever? So it's basically the story of, like I said, a frickin' 50-year-old child basically who's never had any life experiences outside the house, being thrust out into the horrible, godforsaken frickin' world of 1979, and being forced to, try to fend for himself. And as I was saying, as a viewer, you're watching this, you're like, how's this guy ever going to survive? Well, it turns out not long, after that, presumably that same day at night, he's, sees himself on this big TV in this, this TV store with a video camera, pointing out the window so passersby can see themselves on TV, and him having TV being such a big part of his life, he's like, oh my God, he has this cane, and he's just bewildered that he's on TV, and he's like, what's going on here? Where's the camera? Basically, this scene, he, to get further back, he kind of walks out onto the curb, and he actually ends up getting his legs squashed by this this vehicle, this Cadillac, actually accidentally backed into him as he's trying to presumably back up and drive away or whatever. And at that point, basically he's injured and taken in by the Shirley MacLaine character, who's this wealthy, wife of this wealthy super, who knows, gazillionaire rich guy in this movie, this way older guy. But at this point, you're like, oh, okay, well, I can see this happening. So basically, he goes from, 50 years or whatever of being taken care of by a rich guy, only to be presumably the same day he gets kicked out, or the same day he leaves that, security of being taken care of his whole life up until that point. He ends up being just scooped up by another wealthy, even more wealthy, individual or family or whatever, a couple of people, and scooped up because they injured him, and they're like, we'll take you to the hospital. And then when he's in the car, they're like, Shirley MacLaine's like, well, let's just, since my husband's ill, we've got basically more or less a hospital at the house, so we'll just take you to the house and we can have the doctors look at your leg there. And basically, and this house is just like, it's not a house, it's a frickin', castle / mansion place that's just like, it's the movie, it's very elegant. This is a very elegant movie, and when I saw this for the very first time, I knew that without necessarily being conscious of it. And what's so great about the movie is you've got really elegant music, you've got really elegant, all this clothes that Chance / Chauncey Gardiner wears are all elegant, and the majority of the majority of the movie takes place in this elegant house location, mansion locations and stuff. And before I forget to mention why I say Chance / Chauncey Gardiner is, his name's Chance, and it's just like probably the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie Hard Target. It's like, my mama took one. But of course we don't know why he's named Chance. Like I say, it's cool to have aspects of the plot or the backstory that we don't know of. But basically, when he got injured by Shirley MacLaine's driver towards the beginning of the movie, or 30 minutes into the movie or whatever, that she gave him a drink, and she's like, would you like a drink? And he's like, yeah, probably never having had alcohol. He's probably just thinking it's going to be a soda or water or milk or whatever he's used to drinking. Presumably, when he takes a sip of this alcohol, he's like choking on it, because let's face it, the stuff tastes like crap, and he's choking on it, and right before he choked on it, she's like, and what's your name? And he's choking on it, he's like saying, Chance Gardner. So basically, he's trying to say Chance the Gardener, but it comes out as like Chance E. Gardner. So that's how his name, that's how everyone starts referring to him as Chauncey Gardner. Which is a, that's, it's kind of a classy name too. And what's kind of maybe possibly unrealistic about this movie is the way he just like responds to Chauncey Gardner throughout the movie. Like, why would he, just like respond to that, going forward? And I don't know. There's several things about this movie that are kind of like, yeah, I don't know about that and this kind of stuff. But, just being such a fun movie and just an enjoyable movie and stuff to behold, you can't hold those kind of things against it after all. So just watching it recently, I was kind of watching it going, well, one of the reasons people probably think this guy's more intellectual than he is because he's dressed so well. Like, if he was just dressed in like a bum or some kind of hobo or whatever, people probably wouldn't, think of him as being so, smarter than he's coming across. The interesting thing about this movie, and I'd say the majority of this movie, what the majority of this movie does, and so many of the interesting aspects of this movie, is the audience going into it knows that this is basically more or less, for all intents and purposes, an idiot or a moron, kind of a man-child character. And what's interesting is, and possibly again kind of unrealistic throughout the movie, is everyone, when he's talking about gardening and all this kind of stuff and very simple things, so many of the characters, the majority of the characters that are taken by the character of Chauncey Gardner, which is what happens in this movie. I mean, the Shirley MacLaine character and the old husband character, and so many of the people that come across this character, this Chauncey Gardner character in the movie, are so taken by him because of his simplicity. And the reason why they're so taken by him is because they see so much more in what he's saying than what he's actually saying. Like, if he's saying something about, gardening, tilling the soil and making it fertile so then it can grow or whatever, someone who's like this big billionaire rich guy who's all, dying and old and dying and stuff in this movie, who's the husband of Shirley MacLaine's character and owns this house and stuff, he'll see it as a metaphor for the economy or whatever, and the president comes there to get advice from this rich guy, and it's just like he ends up talking to Chauncey Gardner, and once again, he's just, all he talks about basically is gardening, but everyone else who's around this, in this rich schwanky house and stuff is just talking politics and economics and stuff. So every time Chauncey Gardner says something about gardening, they're all thinking he's doing a metaphor for the economy, like, oh, you've got to go through a time of death in the fall, and then comes spring, comes rebirth, and before you know it, the president's on the TV quoting Chauncey Gardner in regards to his his metaphor about the economy going through a slump and only to get strong later on in the spring and all this kind of stuff. So that's a big part of the movie, is basically every character he comes in contact with, except for one, which is the doctor, basically the doctor of the older guy in the movie who's dying, the big huge billionaire rich guy or whatever. Maybe in the late 70s. I don't know if you could have a house like this if you're a multimillionaire in the late 70s. He might not have been a billionaire in the late 70s. Maybe he could have had all this just being a multimillionaire. It's hard to say. But the rich guy in the movie, the old rich guy who's dying, oh shit, I don't know where I was going. I got all sidetracked. Oh, what I was saying was the only character in this movie that actually sees Chance, aka Chauncey Gardner, for what he is, basically a bumbling idiot, more or less. I mean, let's face it, we don't want to, I don't. When I say bumbling idiot, I don't mean it in a negative sense. I'm just the technical. There's obviously things about Chance that are good, including, as I said earlier, the nurturing aspect of his character and the very innocent thing about him or whatever. But the only character that, as I said, that sees him for what he is this doctor. And what's so funny is because, the Shirley MacLaine character and the old guy who's his wife, or who's her husband and stuff, and everyone else that's so taken by him. I mean, it's like, he's under these people's employ, so he can't really say what he thinks about it or whatever. So that's kind of really interesting. So that's the general gist of the movie. And interestingly enough, I mean, it doesn't, what I like about the movie is it doesn't really have like a beginning, middle, and the end, or any kind of necessarily plot. It's just a movie that just has these events unfold, where this simple character is, you know, forced to leave this house he's lived in his whole life and go out into the world. And it is very convenient how he's very quickly saved from, because he wouldn't last like a week out on the, you know, the streets that he was walked out onto, you know. So it's kind of convenient how he was swept up by these wealthy people and taken in and taken care of, you know. And it's just like, as I said before, that's one thing that's just like, but whatever, we let it go because the movie is so, you know, engrossing, and Peter Sellers is so good as the character, and it's just such a kind of a just a what's that term just I said before? Elegant. It's such an elegant, you know, movie, and just Peter Sellers is so amazing as the character that, you know, as a viewer you don't you know, want to complain too much about certain things that you could ordinarily complain about. But like I said, the president, played by some actor who was a familiar face from the time, comes to get some advice from this old, you know, rich guy who definitely lives a lot better than he himself, the president, is living. After he, you know, he basically goes to meet this older character alone for a meeting, but this older guy is so taken by chance, we'll just say Chauncey Gardner, that he has him just be in on the meeting too, so it's all three of them. And that's that scene where I kind of talked about earlier, where, you know, Chauncey is talking about, you know, just gardening, and both the older guy and the president think he's talking about the economy and all this and that. So later on, the president immediately wants to have Chauncey Gardner looked into, investigated, so he can know who the hell this guy is or whatever. And what's so funny is, as the movie progresses, like, everyone's trying to find out, including the president and FBI and CIA. Everyone's trying to figure out, get some dirt or background or history on Chauncey Gardner, and because he was just, you know, probably never had a birth certificate, or probably never had anything. He was just, maybe he was just some love child, probably, that, you know, someone was hiding or something from the world or whatever. But because of this circumstance, no one is able, and it's kind of funny, no one is able to get any freaking background or any dirt or anything, any history of this character, whatever, or at all. And it's just so funny as they're like, oh my God, is this guy some sort of, you know, deep spy mole guy, because we can't. So it's kind of gets a little funny that, you know, people are even getting more, when they can't find any history on him, they're getting even more suspicious about him, like, oh my God, he must be like the world's, they don't say this, but I mean the top agent of the world, or some kind of super, you know, agent whose, you know, fingerprints aren't traceable, or, you know, he's just some super spy or something like that. So that's an interesting plot point that they play around with for a little bit as the movie goes on. As the movie wears on, the Shirley MacLaine character, who's way too young for the man that she's married to in the movie, as the movie progresses, like, the older guy's health is more deteriorating, and you know, she becomes more and more attracted to Chauncey Gardner, and you know, at one point, the older guy, her husband, actually suggests that, you know, Chauncey escort her to some kind of, you know, event or whatever crap they're going to, some big party or brouhaha or whatever kind of event that these rich people do or whatever. So that kind of, you know, further moves the situation, you know, forward for her, because nothing's moving forward for him. He's oblivious to everything. But for her, it's kind of it's moving the microscopic, minuscule microscopic, you know, beginning, the courtship, if there could be any such thing with Chauncey Gardner, the very one-way courtship, you know, moving it forward by having the husband kind of suggest that, you know, Chauncey escort her to this thing or whatever. So as the movie progresses, that's a plot point. You know, and then, you know, the husband, knowing that, you know, he's going to die or whatever, is basically given his blessing that, you know, you're fond of Chauncey too, aren't you? And it's just like, I don't know if we hear him say it, but we hear her say later on that, you know, whatever the hell his name is, my husband approves of, you know, us or whatever. So, you know, later on when there was this one scene where she I don't know if it was after, probably after, maybe the night after the meeting thing, or the party, or the social event that Chauncey took her to. Maybe she kind of comes into his room and tries to seduce him, or whatever. And the whole movie is basically interactions with Chauncey and everyone else is basically every interaction more or less is completely misunderstanding, and it's done in a very subtle comedic way, and this scene is a good example of it, basically by her trying to get all on him and seduce him and kiss on him and all this kind of stuff, and he's just sitting watching TV, just not responding. And she, after a while, after he doesn't respond, just basically takes it, and when he's just not responding because he doesn't know what to do, he's an idiot or whatever, and she, after a while, takes it as, oh my God, you're so strong, you've got such strong willpower, with the husband right down the, rooms down the mansion or whatever. So the whole movie is about, that's basically a good example about, like, Chauncey not doing anything, and people just mistaking what he either does or doesn't do, or says or doesn't say, for something completely different. That's where this movie, I wouldn't call it a comedy, but there's a lot of subtle comedy in the movie. And as a person myself, I really like the subtle comedy in movies, instead of this horse shit, Adam Sandler just bouncing off the wall, Three Stooges crap, So that's an aspect of this movie that's really funny. And one scene that I can't forget to mention is the elevator scene. It's a really, really quick scene where, they have him in the wheelchair when they first bring him to the mansion, and they back him up into this elevator, and they just sit in it for a while. And of course, him never being in an elevator before, to him it's just this small room. He's like, I've never been in one of these before, and and the guy the butler guy who's pushing him in the wheelchair, and he's riding up in the elevator with him, is like, oh well, the old man, he doesn't call him that by his name or whatever, has many of them, and one with an electric motor, meaning he thinks he's talking about the wheelchair. And he's like, how long do we stay in here? And the guy's like, I don't know, we'll have to see what the doctor says. And it's so funny because they're both talking about different things. He's talking about the room, which is the elevator, but he doesn't know it's an elevator. For all he knows is they got in the room, the small room, and they're just sitting in it. And the butler's talking about the wheelchair. And there's one more thing. What was the other joke about it? There was like there's three things. The second thing was, does it have a television? And that kind of makes the butler guy laugh, and I think that's what he says, no, but he does have one with an electric motor. And it's just like, so that way he can get around on his own. And when you're thinking about it in terms of this small little room they're in, he's just like, oh my, he's got this expression of, and it's like, how long do we stay in here? I don't know, we'll have to see what the doctor says. And it was just like, oh my God, that's a taste of the humor, the subtle humor in this movie, and the whole, everyone who interacts with Chauncey Gardner, it's all about just misunderstanding. I mean, that's every interaction is misunderstanding. So being married to this old guy like she is, one can imagine she hasn't had sex for a long time, or maybe even at all, ever since she's been married to this older guy. So as I said earlier, there was a scene where she tried to seduce Chauncey, and Chauncey, just not knowing what the hell's going on, basically just sat there, and she took it as him having enormous willpower to not mess around or whatever. Later on, there's another scene where he's watching TV, and oh gosh, no, never mind. Well, I'll talk about that in a bit. One thing I didn't want to forget to mention is the first scene where she's trying to seduce him. He's watching Mr. Rogers, and what's really great about it, and I talked about already, like ads and all kinds of old TV shows and stuff being shown in this movie as a part of the movie. It's kind of like, the only other Hal Ashby movie I saw was Harold and Maude. I really should probably see more Hal Ashby movies because I love both of them that I've seen. But just like the Cat Stevens music in Harold and Maude, like not maybe to a lesser extent, but in this movie, but like the commercials and contemporary stuff that's on the TV in this movie at the time are, in a lot of ways, it's not the only. There's actual normal film score in this movie, but in a lot of ways they're the audio of stuff that's on TV and stuff permeate, you know, throughout scenes in the movie and stuff, or just in the background or whatever. And there's this really funny scene where, when the first scene where she tries to seduce him, he's just got Mr. Rogers on, and it's just funny hearing, and obviously they picked, you know, the filmmakers picked this exact, you know, moment or this exact song that Mr. Rogers is singing, where it's like, so as you know, Shirley MacLaine's kissing on Chauncey and stuff and trying to, you know, seduce him and stuff, there's like, meanwhile you've got Mr. Rogers in the background like, you are my friend, you're special to me. It's just like, that's what I instantly, as a kid, I instantly, maybe not consciously, but subconsciously, just really identified with that kind of, you know, humor or ironicness, or just that way of filmmaking where you've got this, you know, this goofy audio playing during this scene, and in a way it's just like, oh my god, like seeing this woman try to instigate sex with Mr. Rogers singing about "You're Special." It's just like, oh my gosh, there's something about it that is just, I don't know, it's more profound than it sounds like. You just have to watch the movie and see these scenes to understand. You know, it's such a simple thing by putting like that Mr. Rogers singing that song in the background while this stuff's going on, but it just plays in such a, I guess it's just, for me, it's just so much more profound, that those two elements, how they go together, than it just, it sounds so simple, but it works so well, you know. I mean, then what I was going to say that happens later on is when she comes into the room later on in tears, basically, like I say, this woman is like sex starved. We can only assume that she hasn't had sex probably ever with this guy, and if they ever did, it was probably only on the wedding night, maybe just for a few minutes before the guy had to, you know, go to bed or whatever. I don't know. But what I'm saying is, you know, any kind of, she's probably, this character is sex starved because she's married to this guy who's 40 years or 50 years older than she is or whatever, who's dying. And any sexual gratification she gets is probably, you know, from her own self, which is kind of evident as in this second kind of sensual scene that comes up, is she, you know, she basically bursts into Chauncey's room in tears, just like, you know, just wanting his body, and just you know, just at the same time, just conveniently, there happens to be this scene on TV he's watching where it's two people kissing and a love kind of a scene or whatever, and as soon as she bursts in, he's like grabs her and kissing on her, because that's what he's seeing that's happening on TV at the time. And you know, she's like, oh, finally, oh, and this gets her all excited. And what's so funny is when it stops happening on the TV, then he stops and sits down, and she basically takes care of herself, if you knew what I mean. And as a kid watching it, I wasn't sure what was going on. I mean, I think subconsciously I knew what was going on, and I remember feeling like, I don't even know how they present. I suppose they could have shown this whole scene with her, you know, very subtly hinting, taking care of herself. I don't think any of this was cut for TV, because it's not like they show anything, but it's kind of erotic if you think about what's happening, you know. I don't remember. I can remember from what they played on TV was enough to make me understand what was probably going on with herself or whatever. But basically, she's so sexually frustrated. Oh, that's another thing that he says. At this party, there's this funny thing. And this is another thing that I kind of think is a little bit fake, because, you know, he talks about he likes to watch TV so many times throughout the movie, and just when it's convenient for this gay guy who's hitting on him at the party, he's all of a sudden start taking the TV off, which I think is kind of fake. They probably should have had him take the TV off at least 1 or 2 times before this scene happened to make it more realistic, because up until this point where this gay guy is hitting on him, he says he likes to watch TV. And now very conveniently all of a sudden his character is saying, I like to watch. And of course that's very humorous for the gay guy who's hitting on him, because he's like, oh, okay, I'll go get Larry, or whatever the hell he says. So, and I think he says it again in this scene, the second scene, where, you know, Eve is the character name of Shirley MacLaine's character, comes to basically, you know, in tears, wants his body and comes to seduce him again or whatever. And he's like, I think when he stops doing the kissy stuff because it stopped on TV, that's when he's like, I would like to watch. And she's like, that's when she proceeds to basically take care of herself, and, you know, in front of him or whatever. And of course he's not even paying, he's not paying attention to her, he's paying attention to the TV, because that's what he likes to watch. But as a viewer, when I watched it recently, I'm like, yeah, I mean, they should have, it was just kind of too convenient to have him say, like, the only two times he says "I like to watch" without the, without the two letters TV on the end of the sentence is like in regards to sexually related, stuff, and it's just like, yeah, okay, whatever. That's another one of those things about the movie that's like I probably would have done differently, but whatever. It's still a great movie. So obviously, as the movie ends and stuff, the old guy ends up dying, and they end up burying this character. And basically, Chauncey asks the doctor or Eve or someone like that towards the end of the movie, "Are you going to close this house up now that the old man died?" Because that's, in his experience, in his life experience, that's what it happened once to him. So he figures that's probably what happens every time. So basically, and they say, no, we're not going to close the house up or whatever. So basically, this guy's really had an easy life. He goes from being taken care of by one rich guy to being taken care of by this woman who's going to presumably, take care of him for the rest of his life. And it's just like, I don't know, you feel like at some point after the movie ends that she'd have to wise up to what she's really dealing with here or whatever. But that's, it's just like, how long can she just, not see him for what he is or whatever. You wouldn't think the romance would last very long being one-sided. I mean, she's not going to get any action from him unless he's watching a porno or something, unless a porno's playing or whatever on the TV at the same time. So what ends up happening, of course, is, her husband dies, and it's basically just, there's a funeral for this guy. They put him in this really creepy frickin' like pyramid frickin', whatever the hell it is, pyramid tomb with the frickin', all-seeing eye on the top. It's like, yeah, I hear you there, a little bit of that going on. And at the funeral, Chauncey is just kind of like walks away during the funeral and goes looking around and finds some, tree in the woods, that's, I don't know, got a branch over it, and kind of takes the branch off and puts the tree up. And there's this really great scene. The movie ends with this great bit where, he just walks out, there's this pond thing there, and he just walks onto the water, and he's like walking on water, and he does this thing where he puts the cane, because he's always got this cane with him, he puts the cane down in the water and brings it back up. And there's this really cool thing at the very end, because the president is giving I'm not a funeral person. Is it called a eulogy when you're talking at a funeral or whatever? But during this scene, where he's wandering off and doing this and that, Chauncey that is, the president can be heard giving this eulogy or whatever. And what's really great about the last moments of this movie is he's walking out onto the water, and you hear the president say this phrase that I think is a big part of the rich guy's life or whatever, because I think it's on the pyramid that he's being buried into or whatever. So it's like the last line of this movie is this president character saying, "Life is a state of mind," and you hear that as like, Peter Sellers' character, Chauncey Gardner's walking on water, and then it just cuts to black, and it's just like, oh man, that's pretty hardcore. And obviously, if you really wanted to go in depth into this and that, obviously that's a very quote unquote, biblical imagery, of course, of, Chauncey walking on water, and, obviously people in the supplemental materials of the disc, of the Blu-ray, talk about him being quote unquote, Christ-like, and being so, innocent and this and that and whatever. And obviously that was more, probably intended to be that way. And let's not, forget that the Shirley MacLaine character, his name is Eve, and he's a he's a gardener, and it's, all these things are obviously very, very, very purposefully placed there. I mean, those things, not being a religious person or being an anti-religious person myself, those things don't interest me in those contexts. But, the imagery, I still like the imagery if you don't put any religious context onto it. I still like the imagery of him just walking onto the pond because he doesn't know he can't. And I think that's a very strong, that one moment of the end of the movie says so much. And it's basically like, and that's kind of what the movie is about. When I just rewatched it recently, to me, is like, that's the problem with all the other characters in this movie, is that they're a part of society. So they're all cogs, well-defined cogs that are a part of the system. Presumably all these people that look at Chauncey Gardner as being like an idiot or a doofus or a whatever, that, you know, just a man-child idiot, are all people of the, you know, the American educational system. You know, they're all cogs that have been carved out by the system that was put in place to make them exactly what they are. And the great thing about Chauncey Gardner, this is what the movie means to be, is he was never a part of that educational system or any system. You know, he was just a gardener and did the simple things, and that's what life used to be when people grew their own food, when people took care of themselves before overreaching government. That's what life used to be. That's what the world was. So for me, when I watched this recently, I saw this as, you know, Chauncey Gardner as being a metaphor for an era of mankind that did once exist, that has since been taken from us, you know, and all these quote-unquote intellectuals and these peoples at these parties, and even him, just this funeral at the end of the movie not meaning anything to him, which I can relate to greatly as well, because I think all that, you know, weddings, funerals, all this kind of ritualistic stuff really creeps me out as well, you know. So him just turning away mid-funeral just to go walk into the woods and you know, and help a tree out, take a branch off a tree that's, you know, holding the tree down, and stand the tree up and kind of, you know, nurture the tree. I mean, this stuff is more important, you know, doing these nurturing things is much more important than standing around in the freezing cold while some asshole president guy reads a, you know, eulogy, prepared words for this guy who's, you know, died, and being put in a really creepy ass, you know, frickin' pyramid sarcophagus thing. You know, so that's what the movie, having revisited it recently, said to me, is that where you have all of these quote-unquote educated people, society people, you know, lawyers and all these intellectual, you know, media people, where they might think that, you know, well, none of them do, because they all think he's greater than he is, but in the movie, you know, most people would say that, you know, that Chauncey is, if they could see him for what he is, they'd say he's the lesser person. Well, the way I look at it is, I say the people who are all full of these parties and all of this media and law, you know, lawyers and all this kind of stuff that are a part of the just fraudulent crap system we're all raised and born into, they're the lessers. And Chauncey, being someone who's just about the simple things, about nurturing plants or about nurturing life, you know, in plant form, he's the better person. And just that one bit where he walks out onto the water, and because he doesn't know he can't, is just, oh my God, it just says so much. And just in that one moment, those brief moments where he's walking out onto the water, and he's just like, you know, bewildered, you know, like, oh, I'll put the cane down into it, you know. It's brilliant. So obviously, no-brainer. 4 stars out of 4 stars for being there. It's kind of a shame, actually, that this far into my life I've only seen 2 Hal Ashby movies. Loving both of them, you'd think that I would have, pardon me, you know, seeked more out, and as I said, I probably should. But I guess time will tell if I do or not. Now on to my review of the Criterion Blu-ray of Being There that was released in, what are they saying, 2017 rather. What I love about this release is it uses, you know, I think I think this is probably, you know, an original theatrical poster artwork, I would imagine. I wish Criterion would do this more often. A lot of times in the cases of Harold and Maude and so many other titles they've released, is they've made their own art, and I really like the using original poster art stuff, because, you know, even if, you know, I can only assume they didn't use the Harold and Maude original poster art because they didn't think it was up to par or good enough or something like that. I'm really a big proponent for original poster art being used on, you know, DVD and or Blu-ray releases, because that's the artwork that was created when the movie was created. So that's one of the huge things. To be honest, that was one of the things that I wanted the release for mostly, was just for the original poster art being used on the front there. And my mom actually had the, I don't know when it came out, if it was like, I don't know, 2009 or 2010 or something like that, the Warner Brothers put out a Blu-ray of Being There, and my mom had that, and you know, at the time, of course, I thought that looked great, but after watching this, I put the Warner Brothers Blu-ray back in, and I'm like, oh my god, the contrast is all crap, the sharpness is all crap. The image of the movie, if you want the best image possible of Being There, you have to get this version versus the Warner Brothers officially put out version, because this version just looks so much better than the Warner Brothers Blu-ray looks. So as always, I'll show a back of the box for the showcasing the Blu-ray special edition features. We've got a new restored 4K digital transfer supervised by the cinematographer with uncompressed monaural soundtrack, new documentary on the making of the film featuring interviews with members of the production team, excerpts from a 1980 American Film Institute seminar with director Hal Ashby. You've got these other things here too. Two videos that were really great were these two appearances from 1980 by actor Peter Sellers on the NBC's Today Show and on the Don Lane Show, and both of those are really fun. Peter Sellers is really great and funny in those interviews, and that guy in the freaking late 70s with I can't remember his name right now, but with the curly hair and the mustache, god, what an annoying son of a bitch. The people they put on TV, I swear to god, they just put the people on there just to frickin' mock you and make you just hate these people. I can't remember what his name. He was like, you know, a movie guy or something like that, you know, back in the time. But oh my god, that guy was just annoying as all hell. And the other interviewer it's like a satellite interviewer or something. So the other interview is actually not quite as of a, you know, dickwad as that one guy with the curly black hair. Oh my god. Promo reel featuring Sellers and Ashby, trailer and TV spots, deleted scenes, outtakes, and alternate ending, plus an essay by critic Mark Harris. But anyway, obviously I've already talked about it, but the image of this Blu-ray, you know, release, or the Criterion Blu-ray release, is so much far superior to that of the Warner Brothers Blu-ray release that was put out. As it's stated back in the back here, it says a newly restored 4K digital transfer, and it shows, man. It's like when I put just very briefly for the very beginning of the movie, I put the Warner Brothers Blu-ray back in, and the contrast is all crappy, the sharpness is all crappy. Like, this is just the, you know, definitive version of Being There to have on Blu-ray, I can tell you that, or at least out of the two that I've seen, this is definitely the superior one. And then when you open up the case, you see this. You got the disc on that side, and I really like this artwork on this side, which I thought Criterion did, but it turns out it's probably some other theatrical, you know, ad campaign for the movie upon its theatrical release, which I think is really great. Of, you know, the top of his head on the bottom and the bottom of his head on the top there. I really like that, you know, that imagery that's on the the cover of this pamphlet thing. And when you take the pamphlet booklet thing out, you see this, and it's just like, goes like that, and just some obviously wording that I can read, unlike Chauncey Gardiner, but I generally don't do a lot of reading. So this is the booklet thing you get. How cool is that image? Gotta love that image. And you got, this is the front as you've seen, and you've got the back that has some quotes from Chauncey Gardiner. And then behind the pamphlet thing and the disc artwork, you've got just this cool picture of just the world that he walks into for the very first time in his life, 50 years on, or however the hell old he is when they made this movie. Kind of a cool, just subtle background image there for the inside of the case. So what can I say? Absolutely must see movies if you like movies like this. If you liked, you know, Harold and Maude or any other Hal Ashby movies, I would imagine you'd like this one as well. It's an absolutely masterful piece of work, and it's just such a cool, you know, time capsule for like 1979, and in particularly having those featuring so many of those, you know, stuff from the TV that was on at the time, Mr. Rogers, and so many of those jingles and ads and all this and that. I mean, a movie that I can't recommend enough just for it just says so much, you know, by saying so little. It's just a phenomenally profound movie, and this is, as I said, out of both of the Blu-rays that I've experienced, this is definitely probably the best way to experience this movie on home video currently. The 2017 Criterion release of this movie, beyond recommended movie, and very highly recommended Blu-ray release of that highly recommended movie. So thank you very much for watching my review, and as always, we'll catch you on the next one. And then, so is this light? That's from this, right? Yeah. It reminds me of the horror matinee. It's a great show. It's got horror.
A new TV show, The Horror Matinee. It opens May 9th on TV, on Channel 9, on TV. The Horror Matinee. It's a great show. Has horror. It has more matinee, has horror, has blood and guts. Bye.